Hi, welcome to this week's edition of PHQ, questions from the personality hacker community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And Addison, let's get right to our question today.
Hi, Antonia and Joel. I've been listening to your podcast for a while and thoroughly enjoy it. As an INTJ, I'm fairly certain you are helping me make sense of my own quirks and gifts and helping me understand those around me. I am realizing that I have a lot of FP relationships in my life, be it family, friends, or coworkers. Some are extroverts or introverts, some are intuitive, some are sensors, but they all, for the most part, have the qualities of feeler-perceivers. This brings me to my question. I really do care about all of these relationships, or in some way need to care, but I find I can only handle so much time and interaction with any of them before I feel exhausted. I try to communicate that I need time to recharge, but I can tell that the relationship needs for my friends have not fully been met. What are some ways that I can accommodate their needs without sacrificing my own? And how do I communicate my own needs better so that it makes sense to them? Also, is there any way to grow my own ability to deal and cope with their messiness, my own subjective view, and loud emotions? Thanks for the great work you do, Amber.
Thanks, Amber, for the question. Just so people that are listening, if you're listening and you don't know what Amber's talking about, FPs are feeler perceivers in the Myers-Briggs system. These are people who use the cognitive process or the cognitive function, introverted feeling. We've nicknamed it authenticity. These are ENFPs, INFPs, ESFPs, and ISFPs is who Amber is talking about. Now, Amber, obviously, we're going to try to do some broad brush answers here, but we realize that all of these different personalities show up very different in your life. So one advice for maybe an ENFP might be different for an ISFP, depending on the person in your life. And so these are some general ideas and some general answers for you as an INTJ, but it's going to be very difficult for us, in particular because feeler perceivers, people who use authenticity, are very subjective in how they show up to the world. And no two feeler perceivers are alike, and a lot of them value very specific things. They have very subjective and specific things they value in how they show up. So these are some general things, and we'll attempt to get to some of these as we can here in our answers. You mentioned three major things about communicating your needs, about emotional loudness, and about messiness. So we can kind of try to take these chunk by chunk down here. Communicating your needs obviously is something that is on you to do, and you're going to need to communicate to these individuals in your life the structural needs or the organizational needs that you have. You're going to need to explain to them how you're wired and how you function, how organization for you is important because it gives you a sense of calmness and structure and feeling like you've got things handled. And things being up in the air all the time can really make you feel vulnerable and out of sorts. So I think that's really on you to communicate to these individuals. How you communicate that obviously depends on the person you're talking to. But I think that's really important that you take the bull by the horns and say, hey, person A, listen, I really organize my life in this way. I know it probably seems real uptight and maybe persnickety, but this really helps me be more present with you, be a better friend, be a better lover, whoever this person is. And I can connect with you better if I have my world organized. I know that's not necessarily how you show up to the world. I know that you maybe like to have a little more spontaneity, a little more free-form nature in your life. But for me, organization helps me connect with you. It helps me love you more. It helps me be a better friend. And I think that will really help. I'm an FP, I'm an ENFP, and I think I would really respond well to an INTJ coming and telling me that. I'd say, okay, I get it. I'll work to try to help accommodate some of the organization needs that you have.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking of as you were talking about an INTJ communicating, it being on them to communicate their need. I mean, obviously it's on all of us to communicate our needs to other people. And I can appreciate, I don't know Amber. I don't know your specific situation, Amber, and what you've attempted to do. So this is going to be just spitballing here and just, thinking in very, as Joel mentioned, gross generalizations and broad brush terms. But the one thing that stands out to me is that introverted feeling, which is the common cognitive function for all feeler perceivers, all FPs, is a cognitive function in your stack as an INTJ. It's your tertiary process, or what we call your 10-year-old. And that means it's going to be a part of your conscious awareness. That 10-year-old or tertiary process is a part of how you see yourself and who you are, but it's also a less sophisticated part. Think of it as a really smart 10-year-old that sometimes says truly brilliant things, but overall just really shouldn't be in charge. And so what can happen is if you have a lot of relationships with people who are using this as a strength, you can find yourself playing in their sandbox, playing the introverted feeling game, right? That authenticity game. And if you allow yourself to go play that game with them, that puts you in a defensive position. Because introverted feeling or authenticity is where INTJs frequently go when they're defensive. And it will show up for INTJs as pride or hurt feelings, or it's really not a good spot if they're using it instead of that co-pilot or auxiliary process of extroverted thinking. That's the sweet spot for an INTJ. So if you find yourself in these conversations being pulled into a conversation around everybody's feelings, this is how I feel, this is what I'm going through, this is how you're impacting me, this is how you're making me feel, and you find yourself being sucked into that conversation, you're automatically going to be at a loss. They got you, right? Like that's their turf. That's not your turf. That's their sandbox, not yours. And so one of the things you can do is really conscientiously keep bringing the conversation back to your strengths, at least for you, not necessarily requiring them to come to your sandbox, but at least making sure that extroverted thinking or effectiveness is a part of the conversation, or at least a part of your perspective as you're bringing it to this conversation, these conversations around needs. So what I've noticed is that when an INTJ really gets into extroverted thinking or effectiveness, they create a container. It's sort of this still, unemotional space that feels very protective. Most people feel very protected by somebody who shows up with strong extroverted thinking. And when introverted feeling feels protected, it rests. Because one of the things that introverted feeling wants is it wants to be validated, it wants to be seen, it wants to know that the other person cares and will be there for it. And that's one of the reasons why it gets all kind of wound tight or wound up if it thinks that it's being invalidated, or that there's a competition of feelings, right? Like, well, my feelings are more important than your feelings. No, my feelings are more important than your feelings. If it's always about that feeling space, then it's really who can shout the loudest. But if you end up really resting into extroverted thinking and not having to make it about how you feel or your personal feelings, but more about a structure or more about how things are working out as a system, right? Like the dynamic between the two people as opposed to each individual person's feelings. If you keep bringing it back to that space of like, I would really love for us to have a long-term relationship. I would really like us to be friends for a while. I would really like the system, like how we work. I would really like that to work because I love this relationship and I would really like to be able to continue it. And you'll see, I think, the authenticity person or the introverted feeling person not feeling as invalidated if they don't feel like they're in a competition of validation or a competition of trying to shout the loudest of who has the greater need going unmet or who has the emotion that's not being acknowledged. So I know that that's really abstract. Hopefully you can pattern recognize for your particular situation or circumstance, because I don't know your particular circumstance. I don't know if this is a spouse or if these are family members or these are just friends or children or whatever. So you'll have to do a little bit of extrapolation for your context. But if you can keep it for you, for your sake, in that space of extroverted thinking, I think that you're probably going to see a lot less miscommunication because the other person will rust into your validating them.
Yeah, I think I want to piggyback off what you said, Antonia, because I think there's two styles of emotional loudness for feeler perceivers or authenticity users. I think the first is probably what's attracting you to these people in the first place, and that is that they're exciting, they're bombastic, they're fun, their performance nature, whatever it is that's really interesting to you about them being authenticity. That's exciting. That's probably what's attracting you to them, and that's an emotional loudness that you probably really like. The second type of emotional loudness and I think this is what Antonia was talking about, is that need for authenticity or the FP, the feeler perceiver, to feel validated. As a feeler perceiver myself, as an ENFP, I know that when I get stuck in this emotional invalidation loop, it almost overtakes you sometimes, unless you know what's happening and you have strategies to get out of it. You almost feel like you have to bully and fight to get heard, to get validated, to get recognized for how you feel. It's like almost once you're recognized for that, you calm way down. But it's that feeling, and I'm guessing that's probably what you're talking about for the tension points in when feeler perceivers or authenticity users are around you and they're being emotionally loud, and it's probably causing you a challenge because they're just needing some validation. And I would guess that the more they get loud and intense, the less likely you are to want to give them that validation, because it's like, I don't want to reward this behavior. And yet, I think there's a nuance of how to go about this strategy, is because I think once you give that validation to a feeler perceiver, they calm way down because they feel like, okay, I've been heard, I feel understood, I still feel upset or emotionally erratic right now, or I feel still like my needs may be going unmet, but at least someone understands my experience, my subjective personal experience, and they're willing to validate me for that experience. They may not understand it, but they say, you know what? I get it. I understand you're going through a rough time right now, or I understand this is very emotionally difficult for you. And once a feeler perceiver is recognized for that, most feeler perceivers, if they're at all healthy, will calm down and rest into that. So this idea of creating a container could include some of this validation, and that allows the feeler perceiver, the authenticity user, to just go, okay, someone understands that I'm upset right now or I'm intense right now. It may not even be upset. It just might be, maybe they just need validated around some perspective they have or some feeling they've got. So I think that would be something that I would posit to you that may help with these relationships of feeler perceivers in your life.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I'm an ENTP, you're an ENFP. I'm using a thinking process. I'm not using extroverted thinking, which is what an INTJ would be using. I'm using introverted thinking.
Yeah.
But for you as an ENFP, if I say something in a dispassionate tone, if I go, yeah, I could see that. I could see how you'd feel that way. Is that going to be enough to feel validating? Like what are some strategies that, because I know that sometimes I'm quite validating to you, and I know that sometimes I'm not validating to you. It kind of depends. And I'm still learning the nuance, honestly, as a thinker. I'm still learning some of the, the ways of communicating with you so that you feel validated. Do you have does your pattern recognition come up with anything that is maybe some ways that I've attempted to validate you or communicated that I understand that I haven't hit the bullseye target and you felt even more invalidated? Is there like a tonality or a phrase or is it just that cold, rational, like, yeah, I could see that. Like, is that enough to feel validated? Just being able to say, I could see that perspective? Or do you think that for you using introverted feeling, you need somebody who's kind of emotionally with you, like trying to replicate the emotion and be in the motion with you?
I think I've found myself when I was younger and less developed attempting to create emotion in the other person by, acting in a certain way that would get them to feel strongly, no matter who they are, trying to project an emotion onto them because I want them to feel how strong I feel about this thing. I think the dispassionate, yeah, I can see that. It depends on the situation, and this is the real challenge, because for an authenticity user, even myself, sometimes I don't understand why things are more important to me than others. It's a feeling, it's not logical to me. It's something I feel in my gut, and it almost happens to you sometimes, and it almost confuses you as the authenticity person. Like, why is this thing so important to me? Why am I feeling so invalidated around this when 2 days ago, a very similar situation, I didn't feel invalidated? So I think one of the things that you're dealing with authenticity people is they're confused about some of the strong emotions they have also. And this is a double challenge for you as an INTJ and you as an ENTP, Antonia, because you're like, well, you may not even know what you're experiencing so strongly. How the heck am I supposed to know how to help with this? So it really depends on the situation. But in general terms, I would say that a dispassionate answer is not necessarily feeling invalidated. If somebody said to me, like if you said to me, okay, I could see that perspective. I think what would help in that situation for a thinker that's dealing with a feeler perceiver, an authenticity user, is to ask some type of a follow-up question. And you can use your perspectives process, Amber, to do this. As an INTJ, you can ask a perspectives type question. Well, why do you feel that way? Or why is that happening for you? What do you think is going on here? Do you think it could be this or that or this? And I think that would help them feel like you're working with them to get to the intense emotion also. Because a lot of times when we're looking for validation, we don't know why we're feeling what we're feeling as an authenticity person. We're feeling something strongly. And the reason why validation is so important is because we can't explain it. We can't articulate a rational or logical, consistent reason why you feel so strongly about this. So helping co-create an answer for ourselves is something that I think really appeals to us as authenticity people. By you saying, okay, I can see that perspective, but what do you think is happening here? And help me unpack that. Help me discover it for myself. Work with me, co-create an answer together. And I think that an authenticity person would really, if they're developed, if they're willing to spar with you on that, I think they'd really resonate and appreciate the effort you'd have to discover that with them.
I've noticed that. Now, I, of course, love to dissect everything and know why. I want rationale for everything because that's just how I operate. But I've noticed that you'll make an assertion and you won't know why you feel the way that you do. But I've learned to trust those assertions. And so you'll say, I don't know why I feel this way. I just feel this way. And this is what I think we should do. And I've come to a point where I've gone, well, I mean, you haven't let me down so far, so I'm just going to go with you. And I've noticed...
That terrifies me, by the way, because I'm like, you're trusting me, and I don't even know why I feel this way.
And at the same time, I think that has built a foundation of validation for you. Like, yeah, it's true, the buck stops with you now, right? Which could be a little disconcerting. But I think for our relationship, because I do authentically trust you, like that's sincere for me. I do actually trust you on a lot of different areas, even if you can't fully articulate. I think that that's actually built a lot of intimacy between the two of us, is me going, yeah, well, I mean, you don't have to explain why. Like, I don't need that from you. I don't need rationalization or justification. I'm just going to go, yeah, that's how you feel, so let's go with it. And I've noticed that if I bring that over even into things where I'm not fully trusting you, if we're in like a conversation where we're not at a decision point, we're just in a conversation or maybe even an argument, I've noticed that if I go, well, that's how you're feeling. Like, I don't need justification for it. I don't need you to explain why you're feeling what you're feeling. I just know you are feeling that, and that's totally valid for you. Like, that's your experience. So let's go with that. Let's go with what your experience is. I've noticed that that's also quite validating. And so I think just acknowledging that a person might be feeling something that they don't even know why they're feeling, to require of them to express back to you why they're feeling that way can be like, that can make them even more disconcerted. That can that can like escalate the tizzy, really. But to go, you know what? You don't have to explain it. That's your valid emotion. That's how you're authentically feeling. So that's what that is. I think that helps the authenticity person rest into the dynamic, the relationship. So that puts a lot of pressure on the INTJ to always be coming to the other person, but that's reality. like if I want to change a relationship that I have with another person, then it's on me to be the person who steps up and does that. And then in each relationship, I have to ask myself honestly, is the person doing that for me in a way that's sufficient to keep the relationship in the black? And if the answer is no, if it feels like I'm always reaching out to them and they're never coming to me, well then now it's time to reevaluate the relationship. And that actually leads into the last point, which is the messiness. Good
luck. No, I'm kidding.
How do you deal with the messiness? And the answer is, well, for you as an INTJ, your growth point is to not be around messiness. Your growth point is to get into extroverted thinking, which is about, creating order from chaos. So too much chaos really is going to be exhausting for you, especially since you're fighting to create order. So the question, I think, or not the question, but the perspective to come from that I think is a little more useful than simply, demand order, is ask yourself what generates a sustainable system. And a system is something that has a bunch of nodes in it. And one of the nodes will be the actual order of the physical, tangible items around you, like the cleanliness and the order. Another node in the system will be the relationship and how important that is to you. Another node in the system will be how each individual responds to the environment, and then how they respond to each other based on how they're responding to the environment. And then what are the initial conditions? Are the initial conditions of the system one that will be encouraging order or one that discourages order? And I think as a perspectives user, you're particularly primed to help create a context or a situation, a system that encourages the behavior you want. So, I mean, an example of this is like Disneyland or Disney World puts their garbage cans every 20 feet away from each other because they know that if a person has to walk more than 20 feet, they're they're not going to throw it away into a garbage can. They're just going to toss it on the ground. So they have set up systems that encourages people's psychology to have the behavior that they desire, the desirable behavior. And you can create a system, a sustainable system, set one up that encourages the behavior you want. How do you make it as easy as possible for all the people in your life to maintain the order that you want, while at the same time not compromising the relationship? So it might be a challenge. It might be something you have to put a lot of thought and time and effort into. But think of it in terms of not simply enforcing order on people who are naturally messy or chaotic. Think of it more like, how do I create a container? How do I create an environment that is a sustainable system that encourages the behavior that I want?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, let's say, for example, you are, Amber, married to someone who uses authenticity, and the person comes in the door every day and just throws the car keys on the table. An easy system would be to, put a little hook up next to the door when you come in that keys always go into, and you encourage someone to do that. You creating a system there for someone to put the keys away. There's a place to put them. This is very basic, obviously, off the top of my head. It's probably very obvious to you as an INTJ, but these are the types of things we're talking about. Systems. Maybe in the car, if the car keeps getting messy, have a little garbage can in the car that all the trash can go into. So now there's a place for the trash to go, so people don't have to remember to pick it up and carry it into the house and throw it away. It's a system set up instead of expecting people to be the system. So these are the things I think we're talking about, is find ways to set up things in your life that are systemic, that create those containers to encourage the behavior you want. Because I don't think you're going to ever get a natural, you can work really hard to get a feeler perceiver, an authenticity person, to attempt to follow a structure on their own. But if there are cues for them along the way, they're going to be much more likely to follow that structure. They're going to be much more likely to, I see a garbage can right here. Why would I throw this on the floor if there's a trash can? Boom, in the trash can. And now you have a system set up. And it probably will require more work on your part on the front end for your friends and family and maybe spouse or lover, whoever you're with, if they're a feeler perceiver. But I think you're going to feel much more empowered by, and this word container keeps coming up in this whole conversation, creating those containers, whether they're emotional containers or whether they're physical containers. You're going to excel at that as an INTJ.
Yeah. Just as an example, you and I, we're both ENPs. I'm an ENTP, you're an ENFP. And our car is always trashed. Now, our house isn't, because I have just enough extroverted feeling in my function stack to make sure that the majority of the house is relatively clean. There are certain pockets, like the office is perpetually trashed. I would say that our room, it's kind of a 50-50. The nursery is pretty frequently trashed. Not trashed. When I use the word trashed, I mean, it's not up to the standards where I would say show the house off to somebody, to a stranger. But the car, oh my gosh, the car is always trashed. And one of the things that we've done is we've implemented the garbage can system, where we've we have a minivan. We've got three kids at times. I have two step kids, and we have one daughter with a natural daughter between us. And so it's hard. It's really difficult to keep a car clean, and that's just not in our wheelhouse. And we pay a neighbor kid $15 to go clean it out for us. On a regular basis, we go, here's $15, go get it vacuumed. And that's a great system for us. So it's also being realistic. The ideal is we would do this on our own and we wouldn't have to pay somebody to do this for us. And the reality is that we're just not going to do it because we just don't care enough. There are so many other things to do. So also feel free to outsource. Feel free to not think in terms of ideals, they should be doing this, right? I think that's when we really get in trouble, is when we have an idealism around how the other person should be behaving. If we get realistic and go, yeah, that might be a nice should statement, but the reality is this, then you can start outsourcing and start, again, creating those sustainable systems that might include another person who helps out.
Thanks, Amber, for the question. If you have a question, you've been listening to the PHQ podcast episode, you can go over to personalityhacker.com/questions. You can type a question in there, or you can record a question audibly with audio and it'll be sent to us. We can edit it directly into the PHQ show. You can also find us online at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Can't wait to talk with you on the next PHQ Questions from the Personality Hacker community.